Hey everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Politically Incorrect Podcast. I'm Jim Williams, your host. Now, today we have a special guest joining us from England. He is a prolific writer, a spectacular host of his own TV show on YouTube, which I strongly recommend that you check out, which is called CounterCulture. It's on the new Culture Forum's YouTube channel, and very entertaining stuff. And he also has a brand new book out, which is called The Long March: How the Left Won the Culture War and What to Do About It. Fascinating read, and gotta say, Mark, help us. Let's figure out the process. Where are we going right? Where are we going wrong? Let's talk about The Long March and what brought you to write it.
Well, the left behind the idea of the Long March, which is an idea that came around, really was named in the late 60s, in 67, comes out of the really radical left. It comes out of the new left in Germany, where they were seeking, this isn't about sort of little marginal changes in society. This is capitalism is rotten to the core. We need to replace the entire shoddy thing. And bring in the happy communist or sort of socialist, at least, future. Now, it was a very idealistic movement, but it was also it was committed to this change. So they were trying to work out how to actually get there. And one wing of that new left went down the road of revolutionary violence. They said, well, they're not going to give this up easily, and they're total scums. We need to, and famously, you get the Baader-Meinhof gang. This was sort of a small splinter, but that sort of shows it. We had something in the UK briefly called the Angry Brigade, which is much less famous, but they were, literally kidnapping people, murdering people, bombing. It was a very, very nasty unit. And the famous incident of the kidnapping at Entebbe, where there were sort of 100 or so Jewish passengers on a plane, and they were taken to regime, and that was involved people from this sort of new left faction. So it shows the sort of thing they were up against.
Same thing at the Munich Olympics. Right,
exactly. There you go. Okay, but then there were some other people who were equally, dismissive of the current society and, looking for change, but not wanting to go down that route. And they came up with this idea of the Long March. There's a guy called Rudi Deuschke, and he said, well, maybe we don't have to do it that way. Maybe instead of going for a full-out frontal assault, we can just work on a quiet revolution where over decades, over a really long time frame, we just take over the institutions of this culture and we change those, we make those, agree with us and spread our views. And that way we'll win without even having to fire a shot. So that's the idea of the Long March. It's
a more nuanced,
radical theory.
A more nuanced way.
Yeah, but still, trying to wipe out the existing social structures.
Right. So, under the circumstances, at this point, it doesn't seem to have worked.
Well, in some ways, I mean, we're standing around, we're sitting around in a current moment where, revolutionary Marxists are on the streets in the UK and the US and tearing down statues, and major institutions of society seem to be, quite supportive of them. But it's true, of course, we're not living, thank God, under socialist regimes, communist regimes. We wouldn't be chatting like this if we were.
That would be true, yes, sir.
That would be true. But really what the book is about is a sort of history of how that idea of institutional capture for sort of left-wing ideas really has taken root in the UK and arguably in the US in many ways too. Not always in that sort of revolutionary way, not always, in some sort of conspiracy. There were people who were actively trying to do it. But a big, broad intellectual shift at the top of society, so that much more sort of left-leaning views where, big state intervention, that sort of control, much less about sort of freedom and entrepreneurialism, and much more about sort of top-down direction, taking root in universities, in schools, in the sort of administrative state, the agencies
Mm-hmm.
of the state, ministries and departments and all of that, and how that sort of has changed. So really now what we had, the only place it hasn't happened in both the US and the UK so far is in politics, where the Conservatives got elected, got a massive majority at the end of last year, and of course
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump was elected, and maybe again, we'll see. But you end up with a strange situation where even though Boris Johnson, Prime Minister in the UK now, has a
Mm-hmm.
massive majority, he's
Right.
also at the same time slightly embattled and under siege, because the
Mm-hmm.
BBC, the universities, the schools, celebrities, they don't share his values. They wouldn't come out and say that they were Tories in public. That wouldn't be acceptable. So there's a mismatch between the unelected sort of big sort of cultural institutional sphere, where very sort of generally left-wing, less liberal ideas taken
Mm-hmm.
root, and the politics itself, and that limits what the politicians can do.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about it. Here in the United States, we have a situation where, as most of the world knows, in 2016, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. Trump lost the popular vote by 3 million plus votes and won through the Electoral College by approximately 80,000 votes over a 6-state area. So it wasn't a mandate by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
And what has happened since, which is fascinating, this is why, we are a little early prior to the starting of the recording of this. Mark and I had a little discussion and saying I was going to hold this back, and that was because at this point in time, what we're seeing here in the United States is not just a seismic move, Democrat versus Republican. It's intramural battles, if you will, where you've got the center right conservatives, those most easily recognizable as the Jeb Bush wing of the party, if you will, and the newly minted Trump side of the party, which is far more conservative than the Republicans have ever been. So you've got a very, very strong riff in the party on that side. You've got on the Democratic side, you've got the left being, was Bernie Sanders territory. And he lost, of course, to Vice President Biden, who's now the Democratic nominee. So there's more of a center-left situation in the Democratic Party, and there seems to be an out-and-out turf war going on in the Republican Party, so much so that the Lincoln Project, and for those of you who don't know what the Lincoln Project is, it's very simple. Google it or go to YouTube. They are running ads, literally. These are Republicans running ads, trying desperately to defeat Donald Trump. So there's where we are at this point in time, where we've got a schism, very bad schism in the Republican Party on between a conservative and unconservative battle, if you will, and less there on the Democratic side. Not to minimize that there is a schism in the Democratic Party, there is, but not to the extent at this point anyway that there is in the Republican Party. And it's right now, it's going to be a very ugly and we had talked about. I've been covering this since 1980. Honest to God, Mark, this is the scariest one for me because we're really in territory I've never ever been before, and that's saying a lot. It's just there's a lot of crazy things going on, and I don't know, as someone who I don't, I don't make predictions. I don't side with one side over the other. I just try to be there as a historical person covering something and say, all right, here's what we need to do. This is what we need to look for. These are the trends that we need to look for. And I got to say that right now, what's going on, between the pandemic certainly does not help. And that's going to, the pandemic actually is going to drive this election, and we could be, we are not going to know. By all means, I can say this. Take care of yourself. We'll see you next time. I may not have gotten 2016 right in the way of predictions, so I quit the prediction business. But this part I will predict. We will not know for at least 2, maybe 3 days who won.
Really?
May even take a week. Because
you think there'll be recounts or what?
No. This is going to be about because there's going to be there's no time in history of the United States has there ever been the amount of ballots that will be mail-in ballots. And because of the pandemic situation, a large number of states is, social distancing, masks, the whole routine. They're suggesting and trying to get people to say, okay, it's in your best interest to mark your ballot and mail it in. Well, this comes at a time when the President of the United States has decided that cutting back the Postal Service is a good idea. So now mail that you might be getting and I might be getting on a daily basis, I might be getting the mail that I normally would get 3 or 4 days late. Well, if I'm mailing my ballot out, then those ballots, the question is, do we mark, if it was postmarked prior to the November 3rd date, does that count? Does it count beyond that? Do we count the ones that come in a week later, or, how does that work?
So it'd be like the hanging Chad battles of.
Lord, I went through that. Yes. That one was the recount in Florida in 2000. That was Gore v. George W. Bush, and that was an election that was literally decided by less than 60, 70,000 votes, and went all the way to the Supreme Court. But at the end, credit to Vice President Gore, who basically said, "Look, we've taken this far enough, and we could go further, but I see no interest. I see it's just not going to. It's not good for the country. So I'm conceding to President Bush," which he did. So it was that transfer of power, the seamless transfer of power, which I think this time is not going to be as pretty and as tidy as it might have been in the past.
Yeah, sure. Well, that seems, at least from a distance, like there's plenty of people in the US who haven't really conceded the last election to Trump for 4 years. So I can imagine even more so if it happens again, or perhaps the other way too. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's it. I mean, we are in a country and we're in a world. I mean, you're an observer of the world. I've loved your YouTube videos; they're outstanding stuff.
Yes.
As a student of the world, we are in a world that is incredibly divided. And it doesn't seem, like there's a lot of give and take on either side at this point in time. Maybe that's just my observation. I'd love yours.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I think something that's happened is, and you talk about the divisions on the right, which are obviously, I can see, it's sort of front and center in the US there, and some of the stuff that's happening with the Democrats as a party is perhaps a bit more beneath the surface, but just sort of at the intellectual level, something that seems to have happened over the last 20, 30 years is, as people in the universities and other institutions have sort of drifted leftward, one flavor or another, just generally towards that sort of ideas, the high sort of ground of those ideas has itself become much more radical and maybe in touch with sort of new versions of that old sort of revolutionary fervor of the 60s and the 70s. And that's making it very, very hard to compromise, because again, these ideas about the idea that just society in its current form is illegitimate and needs to be ripped down is coming to the fore again in new ways. I mean, the example that I've seen from my side of the pond is the 1619 project in the US. Have you seen this? The New York Times' big sort of new history project, and this is for those who don't know, a new attempt to create a new national narrative for America, focused not around the conventional founding, but around 1619, to talk about America as a nation founded in slavery and in the sin of slavery. And it's an idea in which America is sort of illegitimate on its traditional terms and is really changing how a country thinks about itself. And that it's an interest. I talk in my book about something called the blob, which is an idea that actually comes from US education policy, where people are talking about the way that you get a lot of intersecting interests, people who all share the same, are running sort of different things, and then they come together to make it very hard to get reform or to support a point of view. And I think you see that with the 1619 project. So this is sort of based on quite radical theories that are coming out of the universities. The graduates go and work for the New York Times. They use the prestige of the Times to promote this new idea. Then the Pulitzer Prize Committee come along, give them Pulitzer Prize for this work, so it gets massive support and prestige from that. And then schools who are already maybe sort of sympathetic to that sort of left-leaning sort of point of view see these ideas and then say, well, we're going to teach that too. So all these different institutions who are sort of starting to sort of agree with each other, but they all support each other, and they take something that might have just been a balmy idea in a university somewhere, mm-hmm. and suddenly it's being taught in K-12 across the country. And those sort of, as I say, very radical ideas just mean that the room for agreement and sort of live and let live, and let's, okay, we'll accept your victory this time for the good of the country, mm-hmm. becomes that much harder, because there's very different views about how legitimate the country really is.
Yeah, to that point though, I understand exactly what you're saying, and it is certainly something that is being thought of. I mean, we are a country that I think, from this perspective at least that I'm looking at it through, right, philosophically, is that we have never quite grasped the the teaching of our history honestly, okay? And that's not I'm not going in the direction of the of the project. I'm going more in the direction of perhaps we should just, if we were more honest about how we started and taught, the good with the bad, then people would understand where we are, okay? Meaning, of course, that yes, slavery was an issue. There can be no denying that.
No denying, of course.
Okay,
yeah.
There's no denying that. There's no denying that it was a misogynistic country, okay? In a week's time, we will celebrate the anniversary of the 100th, it's been 100 years now, that women have been allowed to vote. Okay? So not exactly all men created equal. All white men created equal, yes. We've been a country that has been violent against anybody who might be against us, including the Native Americans, the people who had the land here before us. So all I'm saying is that, no, you don't have to go all that way, but you do need, I think, to at least be honest with people about how the country started, right? We, in our exodus from Britain, there were people who honestly thought, you know what, we should model ourselves after the British and monarchy, right? tidy it up a bit, make it nicer, but do it. So, I mean, we were a country founded by revolutionaries. So that's not a bad thing. It's a thing, okay? Jeffersonian democracy came out of that. And you just need to be able to understand that there's good and bad that came from that, all right? We're here today in what, in essence, is a very free country, a country where people have the right to do a lot of things they didn't have the right to do over the time. We've still got a long way to go. But we're certainly not in any way, shape, or form a draconian society where, people are in any way, shape, or form pushed and marginalized. It may seem that way at times, and it is at times, but it's not something that we hold up and say, yay, this is a good thing.
Yeah, but I think the trouble is, and this is something that, again, I get into in the book, is it's very hard for people who are thinking in that kind of progressive way. I mean, you're right, of course. This is any healthy society is always trying to get better, and every society has its original sins and its problems, and it can always get better, and always injustices and things to work on, and that's healthy, right? When you're saying, okay, we need to try and get better, progressive in that sort of sense. It's what's, how do we make America even more in tune with what it sort of wanted to be? And that's one way of thinking. And if both sides are saying that, then you can bounce back and forth. But
sure,
if you have people who think that way, like yourself, like I guess like me, and then you have people who actually say, we just want to tear it down, and you treat them as if you're having a reasonable conversation, like, well, we're just trying to improve things. Then you give them a little bit, and then they take that away, and they bank it, and they come back and they take more, and they take, because they don't care. They don't actually want what you think they want, and that makes it very, very hard. It's like two people talking different languages almost. They're not, because they're not playing that game. If they find a way to rip things up, they'll do it, and that's sort of what I found happening, again and again, is that reasonable people who think, well, everyone's just on the same page here, end up, being run over by people who have much, much bigger schemes that they're trying to bring in.
It's funny. And I strongly recommend this for people. There's been, over the years, some outstanding debates through the Cambridge Debating Society. There's one that I would highly recommend. And you can find it on YouTube. It's a debate between William F. Buckley and James Baldwin on the name of it, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I'll put it in the show box below so you can link to it and find it. It's The Plight of the Negro in America. And it was William F. Buckley, who at the time, for those of you who don't know, a conservative in the 1960s, probably the single biggest conservative voice in the 1960s, editor and founder of the National Review, and of course James Baldwin, an author and a civil rights activist of the time. There's a famous Cambridge debate between the two of them, and it could be done today in the United States. This debate between Buckley and Baldwin could have been done today. And it goes to show how, the sides have really not really changed that much since the 60s. And it's a fascinating debate. And there are few people better equipped to handle such things as both Baldwin and Buckley in that regard. And it really is a fascinating debate. So if you have 50 minutes that you want to do a little check on, I strongly recommend that. But to your point, Mark, I think one of the things that I've always treasured is honest and good and fun debate. and compromise, and where both sides walk away not having 100% of what they wanted, but realizing that maybe we did something okay. If you have, so to your point, if you have people who are so dug in, and we have it on both sides here in the United States, where no means no. No, I'm not giving you an inch. It's very difficult negotiations when one side is literally willing to give up nothing.
Very difficult, very difficult. And another problem is when it becomes impossible to say certain things in public. And, this goes to what you're saying there about debate. It's true, you need both sides to be able to give a little, but you also need both sides to be able to speak. And there's a very good, very difficult book by a professor of economics called Timur Kuran. And I think it's called Private Truths, Public Lies. It's about the idea of what happens when not everything can be said in public, where you wear one face in public and another one in private. Now, in communism, this becomes a sort of really extreme. It was said under Eastern Europe, under communism, you'd wear maybe 5 or 6 faces. There were things you could say to your wife, other things that you could say to your kids. You had to be a bit more careful in case they blabbed, and so on and so on. But even in democratic societies like ours, there are things that you're careful not to say in public for sort of social reasons. And when that stops political debate, around racial issues is an example that this professor Timur Kuran talks about in his book. That creates real challenges, and one of the things he discusses is the evidence that what happened after civil rights in America was that it just became so hard to say in public. So there were certain political positions. America very quickly became right behind civil rights and equal treatment, but quotas and special treatment was not so popular, at least in sort of private polling. But no one felt able to talk about that in public, and that sort of really clotted the debate and meant that certain things didn't get discussed in a healthy way. And then it becomes very hard to shape the policy properly. So that's a real problem when not everything is even sayable.
True. I mean, to your point, the 1964, Voters' Rights Act and Civil Rights Acts of 65 that cost Lyndon Johnson dearly at the time. The quota aspect of it and the reparation of, not necessarily monetary reparation, but the reparation of attempting to make things quote unquote equal, correct, didn't happen until the 80s. So that's 20 plus years.
Yeah.
That moved forward, all because it wasn't comfortable to talk about it. And I got about 2 years ago, I sat down just like you and I are chatting with Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer is, for those who don't know, the gentleman who is most identified with the alt-right here in the United States. And I sat down and we had a 90-minute discussion. I didn't debate him. I wanted him to give me his platform. What was it that Richard Spencer felt was, the things that was terrifying to him, that was going to take white America off the face of the earth. And we had that discussion, and I let him talk, and people went after me like crazy. And I said, look, I could argue with him, I could debate with him, but if I did that, you wouldn't hear exactly what it is that he wants to do. Right. I don't agree with any of it, okay? But I do agree that he at least needs to be heard, because if you shut him up, then he'll go underground, and all kinds of crazy things are going to happen. I would prefer to deal with it in the light of day. But you can't do that if you shut the person up. There has to be a dialogue. I mean, you have to be, I have to be willing to listen to you. If I can't listen to you, I can't understand you. Again, do I agree with you? I don't know. I need to listen to you. I can't, you can't just let somebody, dismiss them out of hand. It's not, it doesn't work that way.
Well, it shouldn't work that way, but often it does. And, it's great that shows like this, or hosts like you is willing to give that space, as you say, to people who don't have to agree with, and being on it doesn't say anything about your view, but that you can actually have the conversation. And of course, the name of your podcast too, right? Political correctness. I mean, there's some of that is simple politeness, to sort of being reasonable, but when it becomes about enforcing what can be said and what can't be said, like I say, it's a very powerful control on what goes on politically and how people are thinking, and it's very bad for democratic countries who rely on that sort of battle of ideas, that free flow of ideas. And who knows, the bad ideas, when they're not allowed to be heard, especially the internet now, go off into corners and cook up all sorts of things, and can become more dangerous as a result.
Well, what we have, when I started in this business, journalistically over 40 plus years ago, there were 5, 6, 8 newspapers in many towns. When I grew up in the Tampa Bay area, there were 5 newspapers. There are none today. None. That's the 10th largest market in the country. They have a newspaper. It's called the Tampa Bay Times. It is printed twice a week. The rest of it is online. We are losing newspapers in the United States on a daily basis, and those newspapers that exist in outside the major markets have cut back staffs to the point where staff may be maybe a third of what they were in their heyday. Even the vaulted New York Times, which you mentioned earlier, is hemorrhaging money. So, one only wonders how long that's going to last. Jeff Bezos has propped up the Washington Post. At least they are, seeing something in the way of black. But to your point, when we start getting all of these different news sources, it's hard to decide or to even discern what's legitimate and what is just some person working out of their basement.
Yeah, no, very difficult. And I'm a newspaper guy myself. I work with the Telegraph in London. And
some pretty, so you, my friend, have got some pretty high credentials there on your CV when it comes to being in the, in the journalistic aspect of it. Kudos to you.
Well, thank you, but I mean, it's a sort of tragic profession to be in, as you'll appreciate too. I think it's probably been worse in the US, but partly because you had such an extraordinary, diverse local newspaper scene across the whole continent. In the UK has more nationals because we're smaller, so it's easier. Although we had sort of a reasonable local newspaper scene, maybe not quite as thriving as the US one, but we haven't lost. Well, we've lost one national paper, the Independent, turned digital, but they are all struggling. Even something as powerful as the Telegraph, which is a huge national paper,
right?
It didn't feel like I was working somewhere that was confident about its future. It was worried about the next 5 years, next 10 years, and having to cut back on staff and all sorts of things. Very, very difficult. And as you say, meanwhile, the readers are flying online, and it's fantastic in a way. Anyone can set up.
Mm-hmm.
Good for the ability to have, podcasts like yours. You can air things that might otherwise be swept under the carpet or don't get the chance to be heard. But you've got to be there alongside all sorts of other things too, and yeah, that is tough.
Well, into what you're speaking of in Europe and throughout the world. I mean, we I don't know about you, but the first time that I filed a online report, okay, when I knew that when I hit publish, right, that there wasn't going to be any editors or anybody who's even looked at it other than me.
Yeah.
To this day, I get nauseous because I'm like, is there something I could have missed? Because what I'm putting out here is under my name, and my credibility is all I have. And if I publish that, what am I saying? What I need to say? Is it been vetted from my own, personal going and doing the research and making certain that what I'm saying is spot on, or do I need to take a minute and review? Because I've always been a big proponent of being second and being right is better than being first and being wrong.
Well, that's a great sentiment, but the internet, as you know, the incentives point away from that, don't they? And the person who's first generally wins in terms of views and clicks, and so that unfortunately tends to produce people who don't think that way. It's fascinating, even in big newspapers like the Telegraph. So we had print, and of course we had online. And It was amazing to look at the difference between them. I was running a department that was writing about personal finance, and the effort, the number of checks between, a reporter coming in saying, I've got this story, I'm going to write this up, and it going through subs, and everyone's checking it, and I'm checking it, and maybe we'll get the lawyers in, to get something on a printed page. Enormous effort. Just if someone is putting something up on the website, they'll knock it up. Someone will cast an eye over it, and they press publish, and there you are. It's very, very hard to control to the same standards for online, even within an organization with that sort of editorial tradition.
Right. And myself, who over my career, I guess, I tend to be center left. Okay. I've worked in print for predominantly very conservative newspapers. Spent 10 years with the Washington Examiner, which is the, possibly one of the most conservative newspapers in the country. The people who I worked with and have great respect for, conservatives, guys like Bill Kristol, Pat Buchanan, a number of George Will, who was at the Washington Post. Great respect for them. Wonderful people to talk with and to throw ideas off of each other. But what we now have to your point is we have silos. If I want to get nothing but things I want to hear, I can find it. But why do I want that? I'm asking, this is fascinating to me, Mark. I'd love your opinion on it. Have we gotten to a point where we don't want to think anymore?
There might be something in that. Certainly, it's talking about the New York Times again.
Yeah.
There's something about when something's in print. So it's something I think about a lot. When something's in print, you design a spread, you design a page. You have lots of articles across 2 pages or 1 page. You have an op-ed page, and so it's a bundle, it's a collection, and you can have diverse voices. It's not all one thing, and that's healthy, and it helps to create that sort of space. When it's online, every article is its own page, its own separate thing. And I think, in a way, when even the New York Times, when it's gone online, that pushes it also it's seeking subscribers now, so that pushes it towards a very narrow demographic of its most ardent fans, who are maybe the most political too. So the New York Times recently has had a big brouhaha because it published a piece that was thought to be a bit too right wing and radical,
Right.
and ended up with someone leaving the paper. But I suspect that's because, in this online world, just having one piece that has a slightly more right wing tone to it seems just shocking and scandalous, because it's all there is. It's not on a page where there's other things balancing it out. There isn't the same package. So that, I think that drives people away. So it moves it towards being these silos. So then again makes it harder and harder to talk.
Well, that was Tom Cotton's op-ed.
Yeah, that was it.
And an op-ed is an op-ed. I mean, it is what it is, right? You give that space to somebody to offer an opinion. Okay, it's not like the person works for the newspaper. It's why you offer an opinion to be published in the paper. I don't, frankly, and I've known a number of people from the New York Times. I don't understand, knowing that it's an op-ed, why there was such a brouhaha about it. Because, again, Tom Cotton, you know who he is. You gave him the space. What did you expect him to say?
Yeah, I know, but it seems that's not how the thought goes anymore. And again, it's back to this idea of debate as dangerous. Of speech itself as almost a kind of violence, as something that people have to be protected from, because if they hear the wrong ideas, they will be triggered, or traumatized. And a free society, democratic society, where people can be left or center, left or right, everyone has their own views.
Sure.
Only works if the people with all those different views can argue over it, and we can all agree and disagree and try and work out where the truth lies or what we can compromise on. But if suddenly saying something like, maybe I think we should send in some troops, is an attack in itself, to something that can't be allowed because it hurts people, and what are you going to do? You can't actually talk anymore. And talk is the opposite of violence, right? It's a thing you have instead of violence. Otherwise, what is there to do apart from just fight? And whoever's got the power will force everyone to do what they want.
Right.
That's a bad road.
One of the things, and I highly recommend that you do, is go out and watch CounterCulture on YouTube, which is Marc's show. It's very entertaining. You have provocative dialogue, but it's good dialogue. And I think I remember the one that I thought was quite entertaining. They're all entertaining, but this particular one on feminism that you had was a fascinating debate. And I think that, I think we need that. We need to have debate, and we need to be able to talk. And I think that the more people who open up and watch what you do, and hopefully listen to some of the stuff I do, but not just us, there are others out there as well, where you get everybody, you get both sides of a topic, and you in your own little way carve out for the world, as you do in CounterCulture, a platform for honest conversation. We need that.
We do. Conversation, honest conversation. That's a great phrase. That's what the world needs, I think.
Because we're not always going to agree, but if we can at least agree to disagree on certain areas, then we got a better chance. And it's funny for me, Mark, and I know I've seen your work, which is again stellar stuff. Um, I I learned early on. I went through debate in both high school and college, and the thing that I learned was to me most important was if the topic was whatever the topic may be, we'll just say it's healthcare, right?
Hmm.
You have to be able to argue both sides. So I may be 100% against something, but I still have to argue it and convince and win, or I'm not going to be very good at a debater. And and I think that you know if we try to look at the other side and see where they're coming from, it gives us a better handle on what they're trying to say. It also gives us a better handle on honestly coming up with a better way of of debating them and challenging them, because it forces you to look at the other side rather than just totally dismissing it out of hand.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's very, very hard to understand another person's perspective. It's one of the reasons
Mhm.
we're very bad at sort of talking people that we disagree with out of their views, or you really have to work at it and have a good debate, because we just we find it very hard to think our way into other people's heads. It's a great exercise to do it, but one of the reasons we really need them talking with us is because
Mhm.
it's so hard to turn ourselves round and to think actually they do have there's some reasons behind that. There's a whole thought process there. Okay,
Right.
I hadn't thought that way, and that's what it gives you. Another
Right.
person's view of the world.
Well,
Step outside your own head for a moment.
right, and give you some perspective.
Yeah.
It's very much in the way. Again, I'll reference that the great program that you had on feminism.
Mm.
Um, you could see during the course of that discussion where people were starting to understand, again, not necessarily move in one direction or the other, but at least get a better understanding of where each of these, people were coming from. And and that was happening in real time. Imagine what it could happen if you actually paid attention and tried to find out what the other side was coming from, where they were coming from. I mean, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I think that there's nothing quite like it. But, you were saying earlier, have people stopped wanting to think? I think this is this is scary stuff for a lot of people. Our identities and what we think. Well, maybe people are becoming too tied up in their politics as their identity, but then they don't want to step away from it or see that maybe there's another way they could think and be. So
Mhm.
for some people, this all has become very, very difficult to
Mhm.
actually to risk having to change who you are or what you think. And maybe as I'm just sort of thinking about this as I go, but maybe it is something to do with your identity has become too tied to your politics, and therefore
100%.
it's everything. You can't just sort of stop for a moment and be just a person who likes, I don't know, baseball or cricket or
Yeah.
something, and just sit down with people as
Yeah.
people.
No, it's 100%. You're 100%. I mean, because um, people look at me and they can't figure out why, they say, wait, my God, you're a friend of Tucker Carlson. I said, yeah, I'm a friend of Tucker Carlson. And they go, but he's so much different than what you said, what you're politically. I said, that is absolutely true. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to, that Tucker and I can't talk about baseball or, or hockey or other things that we share interests in, you know. Um, I don't tell him how to do his work. He doesn't tell me how to do my work. We can share a conversation, you know. Um, it's you can't get so myopic that the only thing you see is through a in the United States, we'll call it the red jerseys of the Republicans or the blue jerseys of the Democrats. If you're only seeing things through that prism, then it really narrows your scope on the world, and you're never going to get out of that silo.
Yeah, no, and that, you know, all the way back to the election stuff you were talking about earlier, you know, where one side in the end maybe is going to have to concede and accept that, okay, well, we'll try again next time. That's how it works, and that requires, you know, both sides to see something of themselves in the other, some bigger project that they share, the country, the democracy, whatever. And if it's just become two teams and your team has to win and those other people, barely even Americans, you know, because they're so bad and wicked.
We had there's a, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. There's a great historian here in the United States by the name of John Meacham. And John has a great line. He said that there's a reason that Profiles in Courage, which was a book written by John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and Profiles in Courage was a short book. It's because when it comes to politicians having to make a stand, which knowing that their career is hanging in the balance on it, as President at the time, as we referenced earlier, President Johnson did, President Lyndon Johnson in the 60s. I mean, Johnson knew he was blowing up the Democratic Party because he needed to get that Voters' Rights and Civil Rights Act passed, and the Democrats would be losing the South forever. But he also knew that if he didn't do it, it was just not the right. Somebody had to do the right thing, and Johnson took the hit. There are very few of those people who are willing to take the hit for the better of the good of everyone, whether it's someone on the conservative side and someone on the more progressive side. They don't want to own up to it because that requires the messy stuff, which is the actual sitting down and trying to work deals out. It's a hell of a lot easier to argue that I don't like something than it is to sit down and fix it.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. Definitely, courage is something in politicians in the UK. I think we could do with more of too. And you know, part of the sort of, I was talking about the blob earlier. This idea of these sort of monolithic agencies and departments. They have their head and they impose policy sort of almost regardless of what politicians seem to be there. I think because the politicians themselves don't have that sort of courage and conviction to make things happen. They just sort of go along with the tide and are very driven by polls and I don't know, the next re-election campaign. So that kind of spirit would be useful, I think.
Let's sell some books for you there, Mark. The Long March, How the Left Won the Culture War and What to Do About It. You can get it now. Tell us about where we can find the book. Tell us about your social media. And I know you've got a new magazine that's going to be launching soon, and you've got tons of stuff on your website. Let us open up as a fellow capitalist to another fellow capitalist. Please go forth, my friend. Sell some books. Tell us where to get some stuff.
The ebook of The Long March is available on Amazon now, and on Amazon.com for the US. There is a hard cover version, but it's produced by quite a small press in the UK, which is called the New Culture Forum. So if you would be interested in that, if you're that keen on it in the US, you have to email the New Culture Forum, and they'll very happily sell you a copy. If you want to learn more about the book, if you go to my website, which is marcsidwell.com, it has links to various videos where I'm interviewed about it and some more information. There's a reading of the first chapter and just some more information about what's in the book. So that's the best place to find the information about it. I'm around on the New Culture Forum's channel on YouTube as well, and you can find me on Twitter at Marc Sidwell.
Well, there you go. And highly recommend that you read Mark's book and you follow him on Twitter, and also by all means check out the YouTube show, because as I said before, it's very entertaining, and God forbid you may learn something. Because we try our best to educate Mark, but doesn't always happen. I appreciate you joining us. We've had a very fun discussion. I've enjoyed this thoroughly, and I hope I haven't kept you too long.
No, it's been a real pleasure, Jim. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Well, thank you, and we'll be back with more of the Politically Incorrect podcast right after these words from BMW.
At BMW, we know leaving the road wasn't easy, but anticipating our return taught us to appreciate every drive. The exhilaration of the ultimate adventure. Moments spent with your favorite co-pilots. And the freedom to explore just because. Our time to rejoin the road is finally here.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, if you're not already one of the over 30,000 people who've taken the time to subscribe to our podcast, first of all, shame on you. Second of all, we make it simple. All you have to do is go to the Apple Podcast Store. You can find us free there, as well as Google. At the Google Podcast Store, you can find us at Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, as well as TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, to name a few. Now, if you have an assistant device like Alexa or Siri or, of course, the Google wonderful Google devices, you simply say, hey, Google, play the Politically Incorrect podcast. And guess what? They'll do it for you. So we can't make it any simpler, people. Please go out and join the party today as we become a lot more focused on what's going to happen in this upcoming 2020 election. Starting next week, we're going to really hone in on it, and we will be on it every week from now until election day. Okay, so that's what's coming up. We're going to be looking at the stimulus bill as well as where Biden is with his vice presidential pick. All kinds of interesting stuff coming up. So be sure to check us out on a weekly basis. Special thanks to our guest today. Of course, that is Marc Sidwell, and Marc is the author of The Long March: How the Left Won the Culture War and What to Do About It. All the information on Marc and his outstanding writings and his own podcast and YouTube show, all in the show box below. Okay, and again, we thank Marc for joining us from England today. So until next week, everybody, stay safe, social distance, wear a mask, and by all means, take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time right here on the Politically Incorrect podcast. Take care.